started the district actually last April at district council was like, hey, we're doing this pilot program and we picked you and another. Okay, so a little note about the service you're about to watch. So we didn't live stream, so we've been upgrading, which is just a nice way of saying we've been having some issues with some of our live streaming stuff, which is ironic because of how much I've been live streaming throughout the week. Sundays, our system, we upgrade some stuff and we just don't have it working all right yet. So this message was recorded, well actually with this camera, by someone on the front row, and they missed the first little piece of this introduction. They didn't realize when I communicated I wanted the message. I just didn't make it clear that I wanted this part too. So this part about the chaplaincy program in Springfield, it kind of starts partway through. I had to kind of just like motion them like, no, actually go ahead and record this. And then the end, the camera shut off. We can't win for losing. So the camera shut off. I did re-record it, but then looking it back, she pretty much had said everything. She'd said her, so I'm just gonna leave that. But it does cut off a little abruptly. It cuts off with her saying like church Pete or church purse or something like that, church person, and she doesn't quite finish that. And then the last 5 minutes of my message, I just pulled my phone out really quick and recorded. So it's gonna then just be the audio. The audio is gonna change because it went from this microphone with this nice mic, or this camera with this nice microphone on it, the shotgun microphone, to just my phone sitting on the pulpit. So sorry, bear with us as we're upgrading and changing and working on things. I mean, even now I record this really quick. Not the best lighting. I didn't grab a light because the youth are in there using our lights. So jump into the service. It's a good message. It's our week 1 of our Christianity trial. You're definitely going to be get a benefit out of it. Also, as a supplemental, if you check out, and I'll try to remember to link it in the comments, the office hours, I clarified some things. I stumbled on something I was trying to say in this message. So if you go and watch that office hours, I clear up some of that and answer some other questions as far as the message goes. So together you have a really good, you know what, I'm going to stop talking about the message. Here's the message. Okay, so we are starting a new series called Christianity on Trial. And so the next 3 weeks are going to be a little bit different. We're going to, it's going to be probably a little less preachy and a little more academic or discussion based, if that makes sense. So this is week 1, and we're going to be talking about the idea of the Gospels. And so one thing is that the world likes to try to say, they have a bunch of different, we'll get through them here in a minute, about reasons why the Bible itself is not believable and not trustworthy, and therefore it's not worth basing your life on. Next week, we're going to talk about the Bible and science. And because there's a common idea out there that Christians are science deniers. You guys ever hear that? Yeah. Okay. And we're going to talk about how science actually backs up the Bible, it not disproves it. We're actually going to talk about the fact of like science is not a fact. Science is a method of discovery, a process. So some of the people accusing the Bible of certain things don't even understand what science actually is and what it isn't. But that's neither here nor there. We'll talk about a lot of the scientific things that have over time have matched up, and so claims the Bible has made, and the world has said that's not possible. And then as we develop further in science, we realize, no, actually, that is true. Oops, we were wrong. The Bible's still not true, but we were wrong about that. Oops, we were wrong about that one too. So we're going to talk about that next week. And then week 3, we're going to talk about some cultural stuff and the Bible. So we're going to hit from multiple different views and perspectives here. So I do want to remind everyone though, next week that I said is science in the Bible. If you show up next Sunday, you're not going to hear that message because we're moving. We're doing 2 services starting next Sunday. So the Christianity trial series is going to move to Saturday nights. Our Saturday night service is going to be kind of how the structure of what we've been doing church as. That's where Tristan and I get up. We'll greet everyone. We'll go over announcements. We'll have some praise. And then I'll come up and I'll speak, I'll preach a message, and so we'll finish off the Christianity Trial series, and we'll go into our next series, and it will be series-based. And then after I'll close, we'll do offering and we'll do worship, kind of like what you guys are used to, not the last 2 weeks, but typically how we do services. And Sunday mornings are going to be more like we have the last 2 Sundays, where we open up in prayer, we have a time of worship, and then I will come up and I will be teaching through the Bible. How many of you here think I can get through the Bible in 2 years? Anyone? You guys don't know me very well. Everyone who just raised their hand needs to schedule to have dinner with me and my wife. You clearly don't know me very well. I'd like to get you more acquainted with the church. No, I think we can do it. I appreciate your vote of confidence. I think we can do it. We can pull it off. So we're going to start with Genesis 1:1, and we're going to go until the very end of Revelation and see how long that takes. I have some plans and some ideas. A lot of you have seen our online content and the different things, the streaming and the videos. We're going to use a lot of those mediums as well, because otherwise we'd be stuck in just the creation account for like the next 2 months. So to keep it going along and speedy. So if you're like, hey, I would love a survey of the Bible, show up on Sunday mornings. And if you're like, hey, I want not just a survey, like I want like to get in with the magnifying glass and look at the texture of the dirt, show up on Sunday mornings and go through all the online content we are putting out. And it wouldn't be a Sunday morning if, and Alred didn't have a question. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, are you going to stream Saturday night?
We will, yes. We have to figure that out. I don't know, I was kind of teasing there a little bit. But we have to figure that out because we are streaming the praise music and the worship music. That's not going to be live music worship, and that is a no-no with online stuff. So we're looking at some things. We think we can buy a license that will let us do that. And if not, we will just stream the message part. So we'll figure out how that's going to work. And then Sunday mornings, we'll be able to stream the entire service now because we won't have, it's all going to be live worship with Tristan and Brandy, and then as the youth band begins to take off, we'll be having more and more instruments and stuff on there. So that's how that's going to go. So you kind of decide if you want to come Saturday nights, Sunday mornings, what's more convenient for your family, also based off you want to go through the topical series, or if you want to jump in and actually go through the Bible. So either way. And if you're like, well, I want to do both, but I can't go to both, then that's why they're going to both be online. And we're actually going to take it a step further, and we're going to rip the audio, and we're going to create a podcast as well. So, like, let's say you get busy, and you're like, man, you're putting out so much stuff during the week on the Bible, I can't keep up with it. That's fine. Then you just get to work, and you don't have to go and find things online. I don't like it to be hard to, like, when I'm following something. I want it to all be like next episode, next episode, next episode. Don't make me look around and, oh, there was an announcement about baptism. There was an announcement about no, I just want it to be the next thing. So because Facebook will be hard to keep up with things, we're going to be releasing podcasts for both of them. So for the Saturday night and then the Sunday, and that way you can go to work. You can, whatever you're doing is if you're allowed to listen to stuff at work, you can just get caught up throughout the week and stay up to date on that stuff. So yeah, that's how that's going to go. So today we are going to jump into week 1 of Christianity on Trial. And okay, so here's the accusation against Christianity is essentially that the Bible's not trustworthy. And there's things like back in the day when there wasn't the internet and things weren't as advanced and all that, the church was able to get away with trying to propagate their lies, and there's a system of control. But now as we've been enlightened over time, science and archaeology, we're talking more about archaeology today, has disproven the Bible. So we're going to talk about some of those. And basically the archaeologists once boasted that the Bible is full of errors, okay? And they said that there's no independent, other than the Bible itself and Christians saying this is true because the Bible says it's true. Well, how do you know the Bible's true? Well, because the Bible says it's true. So therefore we know the Bible is true. That works if you are saved and you believe in the Word, right? And that gives you confidence. But if you're an outsider looking in, that doesn't really help you so much. You don't feel really as confident on that. So they say there's no independent historical evidence to support the Bible, and that it's actually, but that claim itself has been disproven time and time again. Okay, so again, from an archaeological perspective, let's look at this a little bit. Some of these claims. And essentially what I mean by this is they say the Bible will say something like historical, not like a doctrinal thing. Not like, oh, Jesus is the Son of Man, but they'll say things like, this king lived at this time. And then they'll say, hey, wait a minute, that's not true. That king never existed. There is no historical evidence that that king ever existed. And so if the Bible got that wrong, if the Bible claims to be perfect and it got that wrong, then the Bible can't be true. And if the Bible can't be true, we have to tear everything out. We have to just get rid of it all. There's no point in following any of it.
Don't they have a different time then? Didn't we change the calendar?
Recently,
so their
yes.
time was different then, so basically their year isn't 2000 and it'd be something else.
There's multiple calendars, yes, around the world. Most of the world follows the same one.
Greek Orthodox do have a different calendar, but that's outside of kind of the purview of what we're talking about today a little bit. So as far as some of the archaeological things go, one of the issues was that, let's turn with me, if you have your Bibles, turn to Isaiah chapter 20. We're going to read the passage that historically has had issues. It's a minor just verse. There's not, again, anything majorly significant other than there's a historical claim that is made that has been disputed over the years. So Isaiah chapter 20, verse 1, it says, "In the year that the commander-in-chief, who was sent by Sargon, the king of Assyria, came," and then it goes on. So that's the part we need right there. Is it talks about King Sargon, king of Assyria. So here's the problem with that, is Isaiah is referencing this king over Syria, and archaeologists have said that there is no king. So like, you look through all the records, and he doesn't exist. Never happened. Therefore, that's not true. But then what's happened as time has gone on, you guys ever watch Indiana Jones? Okay. Did he find things? Okay, so what's a presupposition of that? Of if he found things, we can suppose that before he found it, what would it have been? Lost. Okay? So before he found it, we didn't know if it existed. In fact, you even hear him talking about theories and rumors about we think this exists, and then there were certain of those movies where he was even considered like, "Indy, you're taking this a little far, like that's a legend, that's not actually believed," and he finds it, and now it's factual, right? So this is essentially what has happened over times, is they have not had archaeological proof, and so they've taken that as evidence that the Bible is wrong. But then what happens as time goes on, and the field of archaeology is relatively young, and obviously, certain technologies and stuff have helped us find things, but just the time of this field being around, they have begun to have more discoveries. They haven't quit having archaeologists, which means they don't think they found everything. So, the fact that they haven't found everything means not everything, there's still things out there to be found. And this is one of those things, is where they said there's no proof of this king, therefore Isaiah the prophet was wrong, and therefore the Bible is wrong. Well, the problem with that is, since that claim has been made, they have actually uncovered a city that has proof of this king. In fact, there's entire walls with engravings that show this king and even reference this king sending troops off into the battle that's being referenced in the Bible. So now you got to cross that one off the list. So that's no longer a proof, quote unquote, that the Bible isn't accurate. But I'm going to read this here, quote. It says, "Thousands of facts in the Bible are not capable of verification because the evidence has long since been lost. However, it is remarkable that where confirmation is possible and has come to light, the Bible survives careful investigation in ways that are unique in all literature. Its superiority to attack, its capacity to withstand criticism, and its amazing facility to be proved right are all staggering by any standards of scholarship. Seemingly assured results disproving the Bible have a habit of backfiring." Much like this one is, they disproved the Bible until it was the opposite, and now that disproof becomes a proof, so it backfires. And then one more quote. At the end of his, at the time of his lecture, Professor Nielsen Gillick stated, "I have excavated for 30 years with the Bible in one hand and a trowel in the other. And in matters of historical perspective, I have found the Bible to not be in error." I have a typo in there, sorry. Another of these claims. These are just little things, but just to show you. At one point they claimed they had issues in Genesis with the fact that they talked about camels, Abraham riding camels in one of the scriptures in their caravan. And they said that's not possible because camels weren't being domesticated and used like that until like 1,000 years later, or whatever the exact date was. They said, so it's impossible that Abraham was riding camels because that didn't happen. That was not something that was done, and it's impossible. Therefore, it has to be wrong. Again, the Bible's wrong, Christianity's wrong. Well, the problem is, what happens is time later, they find archaeological evidence that, actually, there were domesticated camels 1,000 years earlier than we originally thought. and in this region that we didn't think they were in until way later. And so just because we don't have the evidence doesn't mean, okay, let me put it this way. Let's look at it logically for a second. Trying to disprove a positive with a negative is very hard. Okay? So what I mean by that is trying to prove something with the absence of something is not the easiest. Because what happens if then all of a sudden that thing shows up? Not only does it disprove your disproof, it also then begins to prove the thing you were trying to disprove. I hope that made sense. So if I were to tell you, okay, let's say there's a random person coming to the church, and I were to try to prove, let's say it's a guy. There's a guy named John sitting on the front row, and he says he's married. And we say that he's not married. We have so many of the same names in our church, so it's hard to pick a name. I know we've got like 3 Johns. So let's say there's a guy named John, and John's been coming to the church, and we say he says he's married. We say he's not married, and our proof is, John, you've been going to this church for a year, and your wife has never come with you. Therefore, based on the fact that your wife has never been here, you're not married. Well, first off, that's a very weak logical position to be in, is to try to disprove his positive statement that he has a wife with the fact that we've never seen her. There's any number of reasonable explanations of why we don't see his wife. She could be bedridden. In fact, we had a couple of the guys there this week that their wives weren't able to be with them for various reasons. But that wasn't proof that they weren't married. It was just a fact that their wives weren't there. And the second John's wife shows up, that disproves that disproof. And the opposite happens. It now proves he's married. This is a silly example, but I think to break it down, you get the idea there of trying to disprove the Bible by a lack of evidence is not the same thing as having proof that the Bible exists. Does that make sense? We'll get into some of their proofs that the Bible is inaccurate here in a minute. In fact, I'm going to call up an expert witness in a minute to kind of help with some of this. I'm sticking with the court thing. How many of you saw the video on Facebook this week? Okay, a handful of you, and I know some of you commented. All right, so we're going with a little bit of a courtroom theme. Okay. Okay, so we talked about the Isaiah thing there. Okay, let's talk about eyewitness testimony or mythical legends. No, we're going to come back to that one in a minute. I'm actually going to call up in just a minute. I'm going to call Tristan up because this is something he's been teaching in the youth, and he's very well studied in some of the arguments against the New Testament, as far as some of the inconsistencies and why and all the things. But so he's going to come up and he can get ready. And while he's doing that, I want to just talk about the gold standard when it comes to ancient text. Okay, so we find something and someone claims that this person from antiquity or for history wrote this. How do we prove that to be true? Well, there's carbon dating, there's different things we can try to do, but the gold standard for proving that this is an accurate document, or at least proving that it's reliable and it's likely, is the amount of copies that we have. So, for example, if I were to say, hey, I found this ancient document, and it says that it's a journal entry from Abraham Lincoln. And it turns out that Abraham Lincoln, and we can make up whatever, right? And there's a whole journal. Oh, really? How many copies do you have? Well, just this one. I found it. It was, right? So there's certain things like how many copies we have is a big one. Also, how far away they were written from the event is also a way we measure the reliability of these texts. And so the question of the New Testament, pick a random, there we go, Romans, that's definitely in the New Testament. There are criticisms saying that they're not accurate, and that most of the stuff are fables. There's different things. So I'm going to let Tristan jump in and talk a little bit about the reliability of our source documents for the New Testament.
Okay. So for the next couple minutes, we need to switch the way we think a little bit. A lot of us have gotten saved and believe in Christ, and then naturally we pick up the Word, right? And we believe everything that it says was inspired by God, and that is true. 2 Timothy 3:16 says all Scripture is inspired by God and is profitable for teaching, for rebuke, for correction, for training in righteousness, so that the man of God may be complete and equipped for every good work. So a lot of us get saved, we come to a place like this, and we get saved from addiction, and we get saved from whatever the case may be, and we pick up the Word, and we never question it. And I'm not saying we should question the Word, but what I am saying is that there's history here that sometimes we miss and we ignore.
Yeah.
There's proofs in this book of when it was written. There's proofs of who wrote it. It's not just something that man came up with and man wrote down. It was inspired by God. And I think sometimes we miss that. So for the next few minutes, we're actually going to treat this book as an artifact and prove that it really was written by who said they wrote it.
By a secular standard.
By a secular standard, yes. So, is anybody into antiquities? Antiques, things that are really old. Okay, there's a handful of ways that you can authenticate old writings, okay? One of the ways we do it is by determining the span of time between the happenings that have been written about and when they were written. So, the span of time between when the events that the writer is writing about happened and when it was written down, okay? So, I'm going to sort through my notes here because we've been talking about a lot in the youth group about this stuff.
I only gave him a short window.
Yeah. So, okay. Let's just go straight for the oldest authenticated piece of writing that we have. Okay. Sorry. I gotta make sure I get this all right. There's so much information in here. So, 1920 in Egypt, there was a portion of John's Gospel found on a piece of papyri, right, which is essentially a bark that they made writing paper out of. It had 2 verses. It had 3 verses on the front out of the book of John and 2 verses on the back. It was about the size of your iPhone, the writing that they found. It was purchased in 1920 with a bunch of other papyri writings, right? And then it was just stored away at John Ryland's library. And in 1934, C.H. Roberts was sorting through these papyri in John Ryland's library in Manchester, England. And he recognized the style of writing. And so he got together with 6 other historians, and they dated this piece of writing. So before I give you the dates, let's read John 18. So it had 5 scriptures out of the book of John, John chapter 18. And C.H. Roberts immediately recognized the style of the writing, and he was smart enough to be able to read it. So, John chapter 18, verse number 31 through verse number 33 says, Pilate told them, "You take him and judge him according to your law. It is not legal for us to put anyone to death," the Jews declared. They said this so that Jesus' words might be fulfilled, indicating what kind of death he was going to die. Then Pilate went back into the headquarters, summoned Jesus, and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" That's the front of the paper that they found, the papyri that they found. John 18, verse number 37 and 38 says, "You are the king. You are a king," then Pilate asked. "You say that I am a king," Jesus replied. "I was born for this, and I have come into the world for this, to testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." "What is the truth?" said Pilate. So, that's front and back of this piece of writing. Now, C.H. Roberts got together with 6 other historians, and they dated this piece of papyri, okay? And they dated it to somewhere between 98 AD and 138 AD. They did all kinds of tests. They did writing samples. They took samples of the papyri that it was written on, and they determined that this was written sometime between 98 AD and 138 AD. Okay? Now, this is considered the papyri that changed the world, because this is the up until this point, the closest writings that we had, authenticated writings that we had to the scriptures, was in the second century AD. So somewhere between 200 and 300 AD. Up until this point, that was the earliest we had. And then we find this in 1934, and they determined that this is even earlier than those. Now, this is significant because how many of you guys don't question the Trojan War? Right? We know the Trojan War happened, right? We learn about it in school. We read about it. Has anybody ever read Homer's Iliad? Okay. So, we don't question it. We understand the Trojan War happened, the horse thing, the people hiding in the horse, right? We have no question that it actually happened. But Homer's Iliad was written 1,000 years after the Trojan War. That's the earliest dated, authenticated writings of Homer's Iliad that we have. So, if we don't question Homer's Iliad, and it was written 1,000 years after, removed from the events of the Trojan War, right? And we have Bible that was written as earliest as 98 years after, and we have first-hand accounts that were within months of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. But if we believe that the Trojan War happened, how hard is it to believe that something that happened 98 years removed, right? So, what about the Annals of Rome? That was the Roman Bible. The society that they had, the things that they believed, right? Nobody questions. They study these books. These books are in major universities like Cambridge and Harvard. They study these books, right? And they don't question them, okay? The Annals of Rome were written between 3 and 500 AD. So 3 and 500 years after the happenings of the Roman Empire, that's the earliest accounts that we have. So, let's get into another part of how they authenticate ancient documents. It's by the multiplicity of manuscripts. So, Homer's Iliad. How many complete copies of Homer's Iliad do we have?
Any guesses?
Any guesses? A lot?
A lot is what I heard.
A lot. Okay, I'm going to get the exact number, which is here. We have 650 fragments of Homer's Iliad that make up one entire collection of Homer's Iliad. Okay? 650. That's a lot. That's a lot, right?
Because what's next after that?
We could say that's a lot. I mean, we could talk about how many manuscripts we have just of the New Testament.
No, other secular sources. Do you have any?
We could go...
Because it drops down way a lot after that.
I mean, the Annals of Rome, we have, I think it's 300 is how many copies of that we have. And again, these are things nobody questions. So, how about Bible?
Really quick, I believe that, and I don't have in my notes, but I remember from last year when we talked about some of this, is once you start getting down to some like Plato and Socrates, it's like in the teens.
It's in the teens and even single digits.
And then there's some things that we consider very reliable. They have 9 copies of.
Yeah. So, okay, New Testament. Let's go New Testament. Annals of Imperial Rome were actually written 850 AD. So 850 years after the happenings. Well, the happenings happened at 116 AD. We have copies from 850 AD, so you can do the math. I'm not going to for you. Okay. So, let's go right here. The multiplicity of manuscripts. So, how many of you guys want to take a guess at how many manuscripts of the New Testament we have? Just the New Testament. Just the New Testament. How many manuscripts do we have of the New Testament? Can anyone take a guess?
300 million.
300 million.
Wait, were you there that night of youth? I don't remember. No, you were in Elko. You're in Reno.
I know it was like 3,000.
Okay? That used to be an accurate number. It's not anymore.
It was 3,000 for a while.
It was. We currently have 5,866 manuscripts of just the New Testament. So, when someone wants to talk about the evidence of the Bible, when it happened, what happened, how do we have proof, where are the manuscripts, where are the proofs of the scriptures, we have over 5,000 manuscripts that what is in this Bible was actually written. When it was written, by who said it was written, and there's nothing else that I know of in my studies that we have that's this old that we have this much evidence of.
Yeah, so if you believe in Socrates and Plato, you kind of have to believe in the New Testament. Because there's such an overwhelming, when you're jumping from single and double digits of their teachings and accounts that they existed, and then we believe that they existed and their teachings are accurate,
with a handful of evidences, but then we want to turn around and say that the New Testament is unreliable. It's basically it's a bias. Is the only way is you want it to not.
You want it to not be right. If anybody wants more information where they can look, you can actually see copies of all these. There are entire New Testament institutes. There is one in particular, and they have photocopies of every single one of these manuscripts online that you can look at. And it is the most fascinating thing you've ever looked at. That piece of papyri the size of my phone is cataloged as P52 in the John Rylands Library in England. And you can look up and you can see pictures of it. You can see the different manuscripts that they have. That website you can get on and it will tell you what library a lot of those things are in, or school, or wherever the case may be, university, who is holding those copies of the manuscripts of the New Testament. So on that website you can get on, you can see where it is. It tells you what exhibit they're in, and yeah, it leaves nothing to the imagination on how old the scriptures are.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so that talks about, that's, like I said, the gold standard of how we judge writings from antiquity, essentially. So here's another one, is how close to the writing word. He touched on it a little bit. How close to the original date. So if I were to ask you to write a report on, well, we'll just say Homer's Iliad, based off of things you've heard, versus if I asked you to write a report on Abraham Lincoln, based off of things you've heard, without looking at anything and doing any research, versus if I asked you to write a report just off of things you know from oral tradition being passed down on World War II, versus 9/11, versus the earthquake that happened last week in New York, right? Like, there's a difference, and the longer way it is, the less you're going to know, the more it's going to be handed down, the more there can be legend added to it. You guys, for those of you that were here during Christmas, I preached on St. Nicholas, and I talked about how when he punched out the other cardinal, and how, like, I know we were just talking about this, me and another pastor were talking about this on the way up. And I talked about how that story is contested. It may be true, it may not be true, and I decided I liked it enough, I'm going to say it was true. We're going to teach it with the caveat that it's technically possible that it might be legend with St. Nicholas. It's likely that he punched out the other cardinal when he was preaching or teaching heresy at the council and trying to say that we should add in these heresies. But it's not 100% proven because it was written far enough later that it's possible that it wasn't actually accurate. In fact, and then they went into a bunch of stuff I didn't even go into, a bunch of his reported miracles that were written so far later, you can tell they were just fanciful. Like, these are legends about St. Nicholas. These aren't actually accurate. They're fun, and clearly if these are the legends, there's some truth there. He clearly was praying for people and people were being healed and stuff, but probably not in the way these stories were that were written so much further later and have turned into legend. And so one of the accusations against the Bible is these stories were written so far later, so far after the fact, that, okay, fine, they wrote them down and they may have been earnest, but they were writing down legends. And so the things that were actually happening, the stories about Jesus being resurrected and these things, weren't actually factual. They were just the legends that had developed over time, over hundreds and thousands of years. And so let's give ourselves a bit of a benchmark so we can get an idea of how long it takes for legends to take place, okay? Now, we're not talking about, your uncle or your dad's fishing trip and how long it takes for that fish to start to grow, right? And it's 6 feet. No, we didn't get a picture. I tried. We forgot to take a picture. But he was 3 feet, and then a couple weeks later, he was like 4 feet long, right? Like pastors talk about this. It's like evangelistically speaking. There's a story one time where it's like every time you tell this story, the crowd was getting bigger, and it's like, well, if I tell enough times, I'll finally get it just right. And so that can happen as we that. But we're talking about like true legend type stuff. Like, for example, there's goofy movies about like Hitler having a base on the moon and stuff like that. We don't actually believe that. But 5,000 years from now, it's possible, because if they find all these movies and these DVDs of that 5,000, 10,000 years from now, I don't think we'll still be here in our current form of the earth, but if we are, it's possible that the modern day society could be confused and could say, hey, there's legends that, Hitler was on the moon and they had a base and, we're not sure, but we found, here's our documents, right? So the further away it's written, the more the legends there can be. So to kind of give a benchmark is Alexander the Great. Anyone here ever heard of him before? Okay. Alexander the Great. The earliest biographies of Alexander the Great were written more than 400 years after his death. And historians consider them to be generally trustworthy because they were written within 400 years. That's considered close. 400 years after his death. It wasn't until the next 500 years that legends began to grow. So for the first 400 years, oral tradition and stories about him had been passed down through society. And when historians, 400 years later, they wrote the story and they were able to track down those things and say, all those things, by the time his biography was written 400 years later, were accurate. And then what happened is the next 500 years, legends began to grow. Things that weren't actually true or were, we don't have evidence of. That's when all that happened. It took over 400 years for the legends to begin to start. Does that make sense? Okay. So one of the accusations is some of the events of the Gospels were written so long later that legend had developed and changed and distorted Jesus from a wise teacher to the mythological Son of God. So they're not trying to deny that Jesus existed. They're just trying to say that, okay, and they're not just denying that the disciples and followers wrote these things down. They're just saying because it was an oral tradition, they didn't write these things down for so long. It's like hundreds of years later. And that when they wrote it down, all of the legends that had developed around this story had gotten written down as factual. So if we want to look at this, Tristan talked about these a little bit. So liberal dating, so all the different methods. The methods he talked about, other methods. So using liberal dating. When I say liberal, I don't mean like liberals like they don't agree with the Bible. I mean as in, it could be between here and here. Let's be liberal with it. Let's go ahead and give the furthest away date just to be on the safe side so we're not accused of trying to lower the numbers. So remember, the smaller the number, the better, because with Alexander, that was 400 years, and that was considered pretty good. So liberal dating puts Mark, the Gospel of Mark, in the 70s. So, the year 70 AD. Matthew and Luke in the 80s. John in the 90s. Now you have to remember, the resurrection was in the 30s. Okay? So that's pretty close. How many of you here are, less than 100? All of you, okay? If not, let me know. We're going to pray. We're going to have you up. We're going to honor you. We're going to pray. If you got 100 or 101 in the audience today, you deserve some recognition. We want to definitely do that. But if not, this is all within a lifetime, right? These are the accounts were so close. It was like a news flash, essentially. And you have to think, these are the letters. So when we read our Bible, we go Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, right? We go through them, and then we get into all Paul's letters. But in reality, Paul's letters were written before these accounts were. Because Paul just started writing these letters. He goes out, he starts ministering. It wasn't until later that they decided, hey, again, from the 30s to the 70s, 80s, 90s, we need to write down everything that happened. We're looking at dying off, and we want to make sure. And so the people writing the Gospels were like, we were taught by the people who were there. They told us, and we were with them. Luke was a companion, right? The different companions that were there. They wanted to write these things down of the things they both saw and heard from the original apostles. And Paul was just writing stuff right away. Like, Paul was just mad with everybody, right? Paul was like, a letter to this church, a letter to that church, a letter to the... Hey, good job, guys. Hey, you guys knock it off, right? He just starts writing letters. So those were written even sooner. So these liberal datings of 70, 80, 90 years, or in the 90s, that's the Gospels. Paul's letters were even sooner than that. And then there's accounts and stuff that, like, some of these stuff start happening right away. Now, to the accusation that these were things that were written down, even the fact that they were several years later, which again, historically speaking, is very good, they were an oral society. So, there's a difference. I'm sorry, I'm not pointing anyone out in this room, but there's a difference between any of you in here. Anyone have a really good memory? Okay, we got a few of you guys to raise your hands. I would take the average Roman citizen up against like the national spelling or the national memory person any day, because they were a culture, an oral culture, which means they orally were trained to memorize things. They didn't have iPhones. They didn't have even just books the way we had. So they were a tradition that memorized things. The Romans were very good at this, because you got to think, and the Greeks as well, but they had lawyers. They had to memorize law. They couldn't have these huge scrolls and these huge things, all just easy access to, so they would have to memorize large amounts of information. And by being an oral tradition, one of the things is they would memorize, their job was to memorize entire sections of the Bible, or entire sections really of anything, so they could then begin to repeat it, and they would practice. They grew up practicing these things. One of the, even within the Hebrews, with the Jews, one of the things that made a good teacher, one of their bragging rights, as it were, was how much of the Old Testament that they could have memorized. And a master level teacher was supposed to have, like, it all memorized. I think, like, I'm kind of going on a limb here, but I believe I remember, like, by the time they were like 12, or if they were studying for that, a young age, they would have the first 5 books of the Bible memorized. It was just a thing they did. And their culture, both the Hebrews as well as the Romans, I mean, the Romans were known as being orators. And they weren't sitting up there with PowerPoints and iPads. They were memorizing these things. In fact, when you start to get into memorization, and if you're a fan of Sherlock, you get into like building memory palaces, these different things. This is around the time period they were created, because they had a society where they had to remember things perfectly. And some will say that, well, this is like a game of telephone. You know the game of telephone? So you say something to one person, and they say it to the next, and by the time it's like completely different, right? Well, this is not how the oral tradition would have been. It would have been more like, the only way to put it in that telephone example would be like every third person who repeated the message, oh, by the way, they were trained to remember it perfectly, and the goal wasn't to have a silly message, it was to remember it perfectly. Every third person would then stop, repeat it to the first person, and say, did I get it right or did I miss anything? Yeah. And if they got something wrong, they would then correct that. And then they'd go on, and then 3 more people later, they would stop, recite it again to the first person. So these are people who, their memory is like better than Wikipedia, because Wikipedia can be edited and gets edited quite often. So their memories, their oral memories and traditions of telling these stories, and it was common. For example, if I was up here preaching and I said, if I just started preaching something like just completely crazy, some crazy theory about Jesus or something, you guys would say something. I know you would, because I've heard stories about it in the past. I mean, Shirley herself, she'll be back soon. She's talked about how she said things, right? They were a tradition where they would have stood up and said something. So if these apostles were out there and they were repeating the events of the gospel that had happened, they would have been corrected by their own. And here's the thing. There are secular historians who also verify some of this stuff. Who also talk about this stuff. So don't you think that if they were just making all this stuff up for whatever their intention was, that there would have been a lot of secular accounts of how this stuff is not true, and there's this religion that's just more modern, that we start to have the idea of, oh, the Christians made this stuff up. There were secular historians, and again, if you guys have more questions about some of this stuff, you can let us know. But we can point to it. But there's very, very well established secular historians who reference things. There's a historian who actually talks about the Gospel of Luke, that it was all accurately told. He said everything that was reported accurately, and no falsities had been put into it. So even secular historians and watchdogs essentially were verifying that the things that were being said were accurate at the time. Yeah, so the corroborating evidence, that's something we look at, right? Jesus was mentioned outside the Gospels. In fact, it is said that if you completely got rid of the Bible, like if you got rid of, like, well, we're talking about the New Testament. So let's say you completely get rid of the New Testament, and you only took secular references to the New Testament. Things that the secular sources were saying that the Christians were saying about themselves and talking about. That you would not, now obviously we wouldn't have the New Testament, but you could recreate all the major doctrines in the New Testament. Obviously we would be poor spiritually for not having the full New Testament, but we wouldn't even lose any documents, because all of the original main gospel, or the main doctrines that we get from the New Testament, had been reported externally and outside of the Bible itself. So 2 of those were, we have a Jewish historian, again, who was not a Christian, Josephus and Tacitus, was Roman historian, and he's one of the most important Roman historians, and they reference Jesus, they reference these things. Another thing is, they take things like, I'm kind of jumping back to the top here, but this is a good one, and I want to throw this in here before we transition here, is like the day the earth went dark. You guys know the story, the sun stood still? Okay. What's coming up here pretty soon? Okay, we have an eclipse coming up. And I know that it's not hitting us here this time, but I can tell you in Missouri, they're ready for it. Everywhere go, they're talking about it, it was on the news. People are asking, oh, you guys are going to see the eclipse? They're talking about the eclipse, they're preparing for it, they're excited for the eclipse. Kind of like how we were through whole festivals, not that long ago. And so they're ready for it. One of the explanations about the day the sun stood still is it was just an eclipse. Well, there's a problem with that, is an eclipse only darkens and only happens for half of the planet. In fact, not even the whole. I remember even a few years back we had an eclipse that I was in Virginia and we were outside of the main scope of it, so we didn't get a full eclipse. We just kind of had, just kind of weird. The light just kind of looked weird. It wasn't like a full eclipse. And other people had the full eclipse that they could see because they were closer. It is impossible for an eclipse, for the entire world to have an eclipse at the same time. That's just not how the science works, and how putting objects in front of each other. For example, like if you guys are looking at me and say I took a big, like let's say a door and covered it where you couldn't see me anymore, that wouldn't stop the view of the people from behind me. They would still see me, just you wouldn't be able to see me. So there's legend throughout the world of a couple of these events. One is the day the sun stood still, references to the day the earth went dark, and there are references for it happening over the entire world, not just here. Same thing with the flood of Noah, by the way. The flood. There's ancient civilizations all over the world have accounts of a big flood. But what's interesting is when we had the day the earth stood, or the day the earth stood still. That's a movie. The day that the sun stood still and went dark. There are we have that, or the. Let me back up a second. And it was daytime all day. The other side of the world, it was dark. So in China and stuff like that, they have references of the day that it was dark. So we have a biblical account of the sun staying still so they can have more daytime. The other side of the world has the opposite effect, is that it was nighttime there. Okay, did I finally get that out? That took a minute. I twisted that up a little bit, but I think we finally got that there. Okay, so I want to talk one last proof, and then we're going to wrap up here, is you can't just, especially in our culture nowadays, you can't just make any claim you want and get away with it. As a company, as a corporation, right? We have standards. There's the FDA, we have different administrations. Like you can't just take some flour and put it in a pill and say, take this pill once a day and you can eat whatever you want and you're going to lose 10 pounds a month, right? Like, you might sell some, but eventually you're going to get in a lot of trouble. Car manufacturers. Ford had an incident, that where they knew of a safety issue and didn't report it, didn't recall it, didn't fix it, just kept saying, no, our car's perfectly safe. And as accidents began to happen, as internal documents showed up where they talked about, it was proven that they knew about it and didn't care, they were fined. They had huge fines and lawsuits with that. You can't just make a claim about something. Okay, think about brothers and sisters, right? Or friends. You're a kid, you're on the playground, and you say something crazy. They're like, that's not them. No, that's not true. I was there, that did not happen, right? There's checks and balances. You're, as society, as humans, you can't just make anything up, right? If you were to tell us that on the way to church today, that an alien picked you up and took you around the world and showed you all these things and told you what's going to happen and dropped you back down, and you come to church and tell, we're probably not going to believe you. I mean, we're in Nevada, so we might maybe think that it's at least possible, but we're not going to actually believe you overall, right? If you go anywhere else, they're not going to believe you. So we have to back up what we say. So if the gospel is saying, this is how you should live your life, these are the principles you should live by. Live this way to have a better life. And we as the church then say, the world is going crazy. The world, you look at things, what the secular society is teaching our children and teaching the world is leading to the moral corruption that we have. It's got us to the place we have. There's a reason why, we talk about all these things. So if we're trying to say that the gospel is a better way to live your life, you're going to have the firm foundation of the gospel. You're going to, we talk about these things and these claims we make. there should be some proof. In the same way, I couldn't sell you a sugar pill or a flour pill and eventually I'm going to get caught. There should be proof, right? Now, some of the opposite of people who aren't truly speaking for the Lord, who go off and do things like the Crusades and they claim the name of the Lord, doesn't necessarily, like they're not truly part of it. In the same way that someone who goes off and creates a hate crime in the 50s and said it was doing it with an American flag doesn't mean that's necessarily what the government and our nation as a whole feels. People can go off and do crazy things, but overall, there should be proof, there should be evidence of claims made. If we say the gospel will change your life and transform your life, prove it. So I'm going to do that today. I'm going to call 2 more witnesses up. If you guys want to go ahead and come up here. We are going to talk about the difference the gospel has made in some lives. Because again, if we're going to say that the gospel, Jesus saves and the gospel has power, well, we should be able to prove it. So we're going to start off. Who's going first?
I'll go first.
Okay. We're going to talk to Tristan. Tell us a little bit about your story. Give us some firsthand, not me up here saying, oh, there's a missionary who talked about a man in their village that this, firsthand. Everyone knows Tristan. Everyone here, unless you're a first-time visitor, you know Tristan. You know his character. You know who he is in this community. Tell us a little bit about how the gospel has affected or changed your life. Give us some proof.
So a lot of you guys know I'm seminary trained. So I have studied the Word. I've been in the Word. I've had class after class after class about the Word. How many of you guys understand studying the Word is important? We don't just get to read it and believe willy-nilly, right? We have to take scriptures and we have to study them, right? And the Word says in 2 Timothy 3 that we are required to study the scriptures, right? To show that we're approved. So I held a belief for many, many years. And I believed that I could back it up with scripture. And very recently, within the last 6 months, I was proved very wrong on that doctrine. So this is why it's so important to study. I believed in what's called theistic evolution. So some might call it progressive creation. But theistic evolution states that God used evolution to create the world that he created. Okay? It was easy for me to believe that. A lot of you guys that know me well know I love things for shock value. If there's shock value involved, I am all in. I love shock value. And nothing is more shocking to someone who wants to argue with you about creation versus evolution than when you say, well, why not both? Why can't it be both? And so I would argue for both, right? And I was reading in Romans one day, Romans chapter number 6, and I read that the wages of sin is death, okay? And I went back and I started studying that, and I went back to Genesis 3. Genesis 3, a lot of you guys know, is the chapter about the fall of man, okay? It is where this book begins. So, Genesis chapter 3 is the first time an animal died for man, okay? Evolution, in order for evolution to happen, death has to happen. So in order for creation to happen through evolution, death had to have occurred. Death is the centerpiece of evolution, okay? Up until Genesis 3, death had not occurred on the earth. So, as I started studying these things, and when we had many conversations, I realized, boy, I have to change this belief that I've had for a lot of years. And what that came down to was, when you study the scriptures with the intent to understand, right? We don't just study the scriptures, we don't just read, we don't trust everything we read on the internet, we don't, right? When we actually read the scriptures to understand what they mean, you come against things that you believe that aren't accurate. And the mark of a mature believer is when you can read something and you can say, boy, I've believed that for a long time and I think it might be wrong. And you go down that journey of taking the scriptures and what does the scripture say and proving or disproving what you believe, right? So our doctrines change because of that. So that's just one example for me. Ma'am?
Thank you.
All right, so I know I'll kind of set up because I know she's a little bit nervous. So I believe you're going to talk a little bit about kind of how the Gospels have affected your life and the change. Am I right with that? Okay, so we're gonna let her jump in now. Jessica's a little bit newer to our church, so most of you probably still know her. And just the testimony of, if you haven't heard her whole testimony, you should ask her sometime. We're not going to make her do it on the stage. The things God has done for her and the miracles God has done for her as she's given her life to the Lord and began to live her life for the Lord, things He has done. And it's been an amazing story. So go ahead and what you have to share with us today.
Okay, thank you. So I'm a drug addict and alcoholic. And last year I was sitting in jail after I had tried to escape my addiction in all the wrong ways. And I was like done. I wanted to die, and I asked God for help because I could not see any way out of this, and I didn't want to die because I had my daughter, and I knew that she needed me to teach her the things that I was not taught. And so I asked Him for help. And He gave me this book called The Shack, and it helped me understand the Trinity, and it helped me understand that God is good all the time, and that the enemy is bad all the time. And so anything that had happened to me or that I was doing, it was not God. So I couldn't blame God, and I couldn't fault Him for like any of the bad stuff. And I knew that He was good, and it helped me feel loved. And so when I got out of jail, I got high, and I was trying to figure out what to do, and I was laying there and I was trying to go to sleep. And I asked Him for help again. And my desire to be with my daughter and to raise my daughter became more than my desire to drink and use drugs for the first time ever. And that's been something that I've been ashamed to admit, but I admit because that's the reality of it. And I felt relief because of that. And so I asked Him if He would help me to stay clean and to get to the meeting, the NA meeting the next day, and He did. And I've been clean ever since. And
Amen.
Amen.
and so yeah, and since then God has placed people in my life and situations that have helped me. I don't know the Bible real well. I've been starting to study it, and there's been like little bits and pieces that all of a sudden, like, all this stuff is making sense to me. I know that He is helping me understand this stuff because I've tried to read it before, and it's been so hard for me. And one of the things that I know that God is doing work, one of the ways that I know that He is doing work in me is because this is not my normal way of thinking. This is not my normal me. And it's crazy because all of a sudden I understand all these things that I've heard for years and years and tried and fought so hard to understand, and I've never been able to until all of a sudden. And all of a sudden it's like the scales have been removed from my eyes, and I feel good. I have lost my desire and my obsession that I've had since I was 12 to drink and to do drugs and to sin in all kinds of different ways. And this is my desire now. He says no weapon formed against me shall prosper, and it hasn't. The enemy has tried. It is trying. to get me, to kill, steal, and destroy me. And as I've noticed, the more that I read this book and the more that I come here, the more that I learn from you guys, the more I put my heart and my mind into it, the more I pray, especially pray, the easier it is to do this. And
Putting on your armor.
exactly, putting on my armor. And it's so true. And like, he's revealing things that, beliefs that I have held on to for so long and thought there's no way that I'm gonna not stay away from premarital sex or whatever. And he has shown me why that is a good thing to do. And I feel like I am healed and being healed. And the coolest part about this too is that because I'm doing this, I talk about it to my daughter's dad, who lives in Kansas, and my daughter lives in South Dakota with my parents. And so we're all separated. And because I'm doing this and because I am showing him and telling him like all this stuff that I'm learning, he has started to go back to church, and he recently got a Bible and he is reading it and he is praying more. And I don't know if he sees it in him, but I see it in him, and it's cool. It's cool to see God working through me and in me, and it's so cool to see that he's working through me and see it in other people. I am so grateful. Like, I don't know this me at all. Like, at all. It's so weird. But I love this me because I am completely different. So different. And I never, ever thought that any of this was possible. When most of my life, you know, I've tried to go to churches, and I've tried to be like these guys and like their kids and their wives, and I've always felt so uncomfortable doing that. But I don't feel that anymore. I feel a part of, and I feel like I'm one of them, you know, like, and it's so cool.
One of those churches,
Yeah, I know, one of those church people.
Okay. Before you sit down really quick, so would you say, you agree, disagree, that following the teachings of the Bible has changed your life for the better and made a difference?
Definitely.
All right, thank you. So as you can see, not only does the Bible, but we're kind of honing in, you know, we get the Old Testament with the archeological stuff, the New Testament with a lot of the claims against it. Not only does it hold up to, not just hold up to every standard that the secular world has, it far exceeds them. If you can't trust the Bible as being true and accurate, you can't trust anything that we don't have still the original link to. That we can tie back, so that we have very little, even a lot of our early American history and our Revolutionary War history, we'd have to get rid of much of that because it would just be circumspect. So by the rigorous standards that the world sets, the Bible passes with flying colors with all those different things. But then we also see the more important test is, does it matter? So you can see in lives, you can see someone who coming to Christ has completely changed her life. You can see someone who's a Christian and had a belief that, you know, and that's something about sometimes when we're in church too long, we become religious, right? And we begin to fall away, much like I referenced the Crusaders, is they were religious, they weren't Christians. And so we can begin to have things. We have different groups who will use the Bible and use the name of Christ. I mean, we had the Ku Klux Klan claim to be Christian. We have people who will different like claim on things, but the actual truly following. We have an example with Tristan of, I was a Christian, I believed something, and the Bible was able to still transform my mind and change what a false belief I had. Even as a Christian, I'm not staying stagnant. I'm able to continue to grow. And that's why we talk so much about getting in your word, spending time in prayer. Is there's things that all of us believe that we've picked up over time. None of us just all of a sudden are here. Like, we grew up, we heard things, we saw things, we had experiences. Some of us had bad experiences with fathers, and it's hard to think of God as a father, as a loving father in that concept. You know, some of us have had bad experiences with maybe the government. Maybe we've been in the prison system, or we don't like being told what to do, and so sometimes we resent certain things in the Bible that we see as, well, that's just trying to tell me how I should live my life. But like Jessica talked about, it's not telling you how you have to live your life. It's telling you what you have to do to have a good life. And that following the word isn't like some set of rules. It's actually, this is a very bad example. I'm going to give it because I think it's going to connect with at least one person in here. It's like, we think we're cool, right? We think that I'm going to do my own way. I'm a rebel. I don't like to follow rules as well, right? I was asked to move this Sunday from one. I was like, why do I have to move? I'm already sitting here. Why do we have to move over one? Like, I was like, oh, that's the flesh talking. There's really no reason not to. You know, little things like that sometimes we can just be like, I want things my own way. Well, in the same way that if you would take all the ingredients from a recipe, never read the recipe because I don't like to be told what to do, try to make something, it come out completely horrible, right? Like, well, you didn't follow the recipe. So in the same way as someone who goes around eating flour and egg combinations that are not cakes or bread, eating, raw meat and getting sick over and over and over because they're not following the directions they thought they could figure out on their own, we consider that person to be a fool. Not a single person, one of us, would want to go and visit someone in the hospital and try to help them because they keep getting sick because they're not preparing food the right way. We would want to slap them and say, do it right, follow the rules, right? But we wouldn't consider that oppressive. Have any of you ever felt oppressed when you went to a restaurant and they cooked your food in a healthy way? Like a way that wasn't going to pass on. They washed the lettuce before they made your salad, right? They made sure the meat wasn't spoiled before they cooked it and gave it to you. You've never felt oppressed, right? Maybe when you got the bill, you might have felt oppressed. But you were never oppressed because someone followed the food and health rules to make sure they weren't giving you food poisoning. Had food poisoning. That does feel like oppression. In the same way, the Bible isn't a controlling book of rules of do this and do that so God can make your life miserable. The idea is God created you. He knows you. He loved you. And he knows that certain things that humans are in a sinful world we have a proclivity to run towards are going to be bad for you. In the same way, we don't let our kids go and stick forks in an outlet and eat rat poisoning or play with the Raid ant poison bottle or bleach or, even Tide Pods. Those things do look really good. I know there was an issue in 2019 with those. Those are deceptive. They kind of do look really yummy. We protect our kids from these things. We're not bad parents because we're not letting our kids express their personality. No, you let your kid express their personality to go play on a train track, you're probably going to jail because you are considered a monster, not a parent. Well, in the same way, God has given us rules and guidelines, not to make it so we can't have fun and control us, because he knows how we're designed. If he knows we run off and do whatever we want, however we want, whenever we want, we're going to have negative consequences. In fact, many of us don't then yield to him until we get to the place where we say, there's nothing left. Okay, I've tried everything. Jessica told the story of, she's like, God, I don't want to live. I don't want to die either because I have a daughter. What do I do? I'm going to listen to you. And then how her life is better. And so that's what the word is it is God walking with us. It's not oppression. It's not any of these things. Now, those can be taken out. I'm not saying those things have never happened. People will use things. But that's the idea behind God. And when we come to God, we follow God, he has our best at heart. He knows his rules are to prosper us and to be good for us, not to cause us harm or keep us from having fun. Amen? Amen. All right, let's stand. We're going to close in prayer. go ahead and bow your heads as we pray. Lord, I thank you for today. I thank you for this message. Lord, I thank you that when we begin to have questions about the word, or we see an accusation about the inaccuracy of the word, and we come and we ask the church about it, that the answer isn't just, well, just have faith. Just believe the Bible is true. Lord, yes, we have faith. We believe the Bible is true. But Lord, that there are answers. Lord, is every little tiny thing proven all? No, but neither is it in our life. And that the standard that we use for our own lives is far exceeded in the standard the Bible has as far as proofs. That yes, there's an element of faith to our religion, but that doesn't extend to everything. There's answers for these things. There's logical answers. There's archeological. There's proofs. There's, as we'll see next week, there's scientific answers to back up the claims that the Word has. And so while there's nothing that we can ever be 100% completely know, everything has some sort of uncertainty to it, Lord, that beyond a shadow of a doubt, we can believe in your word, and we thank you for that. I just pray everyone here to begin to have a hunger for more knowledge of you and a hunger to spend time with you through your word and prayer. I just pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. We are making a concerted effort to produce a lot more content for you, increasing the quality of the content. Again, this lighting not withstanding. And so I hope you can enjoy that. We're going live. We're doing videos and stuff all throughout the week. Just so you have that available. We have podcasts coming. We have a bunch of some other stuff coming. We will go back to normal live streaming. I'm actually digging kind of this camera from the front row thing, but I think we'll still stream on the church Facebook page. Normal streaming. Maybe I'll keep doing this and put this on my personal. So maybe I'll link up all of our different things, all the places you can follow us at the church. There, and then also probably once we get the podcast and stuff going, I'll put all that information plus the podcast on our Facebook page as a pinned post. So if you're watching this in the future, feel free to just go there and check that out. If it's not like years in the future, that pinned post probably has all the places you can check us out and see. So, all right, you guys have a blessed week.